Module 6. Starting today, we have 4 lectures, including today, left. How about that for the semester? So 2 more modules and 4 more lectures. So that's hard to believe, isn't it? Seems like this semester has flown. But once again, you get old and that's life, you know? I'll be 90 next week. I don't look a day over 80. That's great. All right, so we've got movement and the skeletal system this time, and the skeletal muscle system, excuse me. So we introduced muscles and movement last time, particularly at the microscopic level of anatomy, and now we're going to look at the macroscopic view, the stuff you can actually see. And because of that, I guess because you can see it and there's pretty pictures of it, I kind of like this module better. So, but who cares what I like? What I've done in terms of the beginning of this section is to add for you really a complete recap of Module 4's discussion on movement itself. Just to remind us in terms of the terms, what we're talking about. So let's just review those right away. The anatomical position, remember that in terms of the anatomical position is this. So standing erect, feet together, pointed forward, limbs to your side, and palms facing forward. Okay, so that's the anatomical position. Superior means above something. Okay, inferior is not how you feel about yourself. How I feel about myself. It's below something. And no, I'm not below, and neither are you. You guys are great. Proximal means nearest to something, and distal means a ways away. So if you're talking about something that's a ways away, it means that it's distal. The midline is the imaginary line down the center of the body that separates the right and left halves. The mid-sagittal plane is similar to that. It's that same sort of line, but it divides the body. It bisects the body into equal halves, left and right halves. So the midline is the line, the mid-sagittal plane is the division, all right? So if you're sort of a fan of the scriptures and you remember Yahweh God making a covenant with Abraham, the first covenant, remember that story? And Yahweh has Abraham gather a bunch of animals, sacrificial animals, and do a mid-sagittal plane on all of those animals, divide them right down the middle. All right, remember that story? Do we remember that story at all? So, and then he has them lay the halves, so cuts them down the middle, has them lay the halves next to one another, you know, in a line. Well, as it turns out, that is an ancient Near Eastern practice in terms of ratifying covenants, and that's what Yahweh God was doing with Abraham at that point, ratifying covenants. And so it's kind of a stinky, smelly, bloody way to ratify a covenant, but that's the way it was done in many Near Eastern countries when they would agree to do something. And so then the participants of the and I'm getting off, I know, but it's still, you'll remember mid-sagittal plane for the rest of your life now. So the participants of the covenant would then walk between those divided halves, all right? That's part of the ceremony of establishing the covenant for the purpose of symbolically, of graphically reminding themselves, this is what happens to me. I get bisected mid-sagittally if I violate the terms of the covenant. All right? How about that? So, Yahweh God sets that up with Abraham. How do you think Abraham is feeling about that? Not too good. As a matter of fact, he's terrified, and he's literally, the word is terrified in his sleep, and And so Yahweh appears to him in his sleep in a dream. And there is these images, they're theophanies, a smoking fire pot and a torch. And in his dream, why is Abraham terrified? Because there's no way in the world he is going to be able to keep his part of the deal with God. I mean, who can keep their part of any deal with God? Abraham knew that and was terrified. He figures he's going to become mid-sagittally bisected. But in the dream, Yahweh says, this is what the deal really is. And so the smoking fire pot and the torch pass between the halved animals and not Abraham. Meaning, it is Yahweh who will establish the covenant and provide for the means by which that covenant will be satisfied. It's an unconditional covenant. It's a great covenant of grace. One of the bloodiest but most beautiful pictures of what God does for us in all of Scripture, right there, right at the beginning. Genesis chapter 15, if you want to check it out. So, now you had your Bible lesson today in addition. Lateral is the part of the body located away from the midline, and medial is the part closest to the midline. Extension is to straighten a joint. Flexion, there you go, those bulging muscles, like I said, is decrease the angle between the bones of a joint. Plantar flexion means to move the angle and stand on the toes, on the tippy toes. So that's flexion. And plantar flexion means to move the ankle to, move the ankle to stand on, I'm sorry. Flexion decreases the angle between the bones and the joints. So that's to move your feet up. Plantar flexion means to move the angle to stand on the toes. Always get that one confused, and I'm not sure why, but that's the deal there. Dorsiflexion decreases the angle between the foot and the tibia. And actually, I got that wrong too. That is the movement of the feet up like that. Abduction is to move the bones away from the midline. Adduction is to move the bones towards the midline. Inversion is moving the feet inward. I forget what that's called. That's pigeon-toed, I think. That's what that is. Pigeon-toed. And eversion is turning the feet outward. And what is that? What do you call that one? You call it looking like an idiot, I know. But Charlie Chaplin, the old silent film star, used to walk like that. Purposefully, part of his character. Circumduction is a circular motion by ball and joints, ball and socket joints. Rotation is when a joint turns on a bone on its axis, either medial rotation, meaning to move towards the midline, or lateral rotation away from the midline. Pronation is rotation of the palm to face inferior or posterior. So pronation is inferior or posterior, all right? And then supination is to move the palm to face superior or anterior. So in terms of to move it above or anterior towards the front. So in terms of these things, those are just reminders. I don't think you're not examined on those things in this module, but it's just helpful to remember these things in terms of our conversations about the skeletal muscle system. So here we go. We're on page 155 and almost to the bottom of page 1 of your notes. So in terms of muscles, basic terms about muscles and principles about muscles. So they typically attach to bones via tendons. All right. So in terms of that thing, I'm looking at the bottom picture 6.1, and I didn't remember if they don't have pictures of tendons here, or let's see if it's the next page. No, they do not. So we'll just blow past that. Typically, a muscle attaches to one bone that moves significantly and to another that stays relatively stationary. Think of your Achilles in terms of attaching to your foot and the movement there. The origin is the point at which a muscle's tendon attaches to the more stationary bone. Origins are usually more proximal and more medial. And then insertion is the point at which a muscle's tendon attaches to the movable bone. Insertions are usually more distal and more lateral. So in terms of being away and in terms of away from the midline. So, and that only makes sense, right? In terms of where you're attaching to something that's moving more significantly. So the belly, the belly is the largest is the largest part of the muscle, which actually contains the muscle cells. So if you are looking at page 155, the triceps there in terms of that. You see the belly of that thing. And they depict the belly then in terms of the forearm extended there of that entire muscle. And so muscles never work individually, meaning they always work in groups of two or more. So the classic example is depicted in terms of this figure on the bottom of page 155. The biceps brachii contracts and the triceps brachii relaxes so that the forearm can be flexed. The biceps relaxes and the triceps contracts to extend the forearm. So you get the picture here in terms of the biceps on the right, the forearm flexed. You see the movement of it, and then on the other side you get the idea in terms of how that's working there in terms of the extension by virtue of the biceps, and in terms of the triceps contracting in order to perform the opposite of these two things. Again, so you don't have one muscle doing both. You have one muscle working, and if you turn over to page 2, you see the term for what they're doing, and that is synergism, muscles that work together. Sorry about that. That's antagonism is what I'm looking for in terms of the opposite, but muscles that work together to create the same motion, and we will see there's a lot of those. They work together to perform a similar movement. One of them is usually prime with regards to that movement. It's called the prime mover. One muscle that is more important than the other in creating that motion. And then the antagonist is the muscle that works opposite of another muscle. So again, in terms of the contraction and the relaxation of the muscle, or the extension of the muscle, you've got two working opposite, and they are known as antagonists. So muscles only contract, they pull, and they do not push. So muscles work as levers, and this is depicted on page 157 in terms of the type of lever sort of systems that muscles exhibit. There's three types. There's the first class type lever and second and third. So a lever, if you're not familiar with the concept, is a rigid bar that rotates around a fixed point, and that fixed point is called a fulcrum. And so when force or effort is applied, a weight or resistance is moved. So that's the concept of lever. Is that a question or is that a stretch? That was a stretch. Okay. So in terms of a first class lever, you have that exemplified both in life and then in terms of anatomy. You see it there depicted in terms of moving the neck So you have, in a first class lever, the life example is a seesaw. The fulcrum is in the middle, and that makes real good sense, right? In terms of the weight between the effort and the resistance. In other words, you have effort on one side and resistance on the other of that seesaw. If you're down, and didn't you hate it when as a kid when you had somebody that's just a little bit bigger than you, and they're able to resist until they decide to get off the seesaw and drop you all the way down? Never did like that, but in any respect. So that's the example in life of a first-class lever. And then similarly, you see in terms of the fulcrum on your neck, it's right there at the base of your neck, and the effort then is to move that fulcrum back, and the resistance is the weight on the front of your head to resist it going back. And so that is a first-class type lever. Second-class lever is exemplified by the wheelbarrow in life. You see the examples there in terms of where the fulcrum is. It's at the wheel. In other words, you're able to lift and move heavy objects or a lot of stuff by virtue of this type of fulcrum. When you, by this type of lever, when you have the fulcrum at the wheel, and the effort, of course, is put there on the handles of the wheelbarrow, and obviously the resistance then is the weight that's inside of the wheelbarrow. And you see how that works then in terms of relating that to the foot. And so you have effort in terms of the muscles there at the base of the foot, at the heel. The fulcrum is at the ball of the foot, and then the resistance is your entire body, exemplified by the ankle, but really we're talking about your whole body in terms of moving it up on your tippy toes. The last kind of a lever is a third class, and it's exemplified in life with the shovel. So you see where the fulcrum is, which is the handle of the shovel. The effort, so in terms of the fulcrum, that's moving it, but the effort is right here at the base of the shovel. That's where you're going to move the stuff, which is the resistance in the bottom of the shovel. In this picture, they're pointing to snow, but you see the effort there as it relates to your arm is the same type of, well, it's not exactly the same in terms of the straightness of that shovel, but it's the bend of your elbow. And the fulcrum, though, in this instance, is below in terms of your elbow, and then of course the resistance is your hand and or whatever is in your hand. So again, in terms of relating this to what we're discussing, it has to do with the fact that muscles only contract, they don't push. So if you're pushing something, you are still using muscles that are contracting as opposed to and pulling as opposed to pushing. So is there questions about that stuff? It just kind of is, and it's what I told you with regards to the end of Module 5. You just got to go over it. I mean, there's no other way to do it. And then the same thing with where we're going next. Figure 6.3 on page 159. Probably a pretty good picture to know in terms of the exam. And really in terms of this module. I mean, to become familiar with the muscles in terms of your anatomy, that's pretty good. It's as good as any picture as I've seen. So your ability to draw that would probably be a good thing, no matter your artistic skills. So I have not duplicated the drawing for you in your terms, but I have mentioned to you in terms of overview, and you see these same things on the bottom of page 159. So in terms of thinking of muscles in general, there's basically 7 ideas associated, and then those ideas translate to naming the muscles as well. So another word is criteria, that's listed there in your notes. So muscle size, obviously one of them. Muscle shape, location of the muscle, the orientation of the muscle fascicles in terms of the bundles of muscle fibers. Remember from last module, that's what we identified, fascicles, and they're just a bunch of muscle cells, muscle fibers. Muscle origin and insertion, the number of heads or origins on the muscle, and then the muscle function. So those are the general ways, the ideas associated with muscles and their naming. So let's go through a little of this in terms of the meaning of these things. Longus, surprise, surprise. Did you get to turn on the camera? You did? Thank you, sorry, thank you. So longus just means long, all right? So, and brevis, I don't know why they're funny to me, but they are. It's just short, so brevis is short. The brachium is the upper arm, and again, these things are well, let's see, is brachium, that is a term meaning upper arm. The brachialis muscle is located on the upper arm, so that's the idea there in terms of brachium. So, and you see the brachialis depicted there in figure 6.3, particularly from the anterior view. The biceps brachii is there also, and again we've identified that several times, but biceps brachii is, biceps means 2 heads, it's a 2-headed muscle on the upper arm. The tibialis anterior is located over the tibia on the anterior side, so in terms of that tibialis, where is it depicted? I know it's there, so, and it is not depicted, so let's see, I don't see it. I tell you, because some of these are and some of them are not. The gluteus maximus, of course the glutix or the buttocks muscle is depicted, of course, from the posterior view. You see it midway in terms of the depictions there. The gluteus minimus is the smallest of the buttocks muscles, and it is roughly portrayed there in terms of, well, it's not. Sadly, that's right. It's beneath. It's beneath the maximus and the medius. The gluteus medius is a size in between the maximus and the minimus, and that one is depicted. The deltoid is the triangular, deltoid literally means triangular shaped, and in terms of the deltoid, let's see if it is displayed for us there. There it is in terms of the posterior view, there at the top near the shoulder. The trapezius is shaped like a trapezoid, and it is likewise depicted from the anterior view up on the shoulder. The quadratus is a rectangular shaped, quad of course meaning rectangular shape. The quadratus is, okay, where did it go? I tell you. Somebody help the boy, but I don't see it here. I don't think it's depicted, the quadratus. It is not. The rhomboidal is a rhombus-shaped muscle, and I don't think that one was. There it is, the rhomboidal. It is depicted on the posterior view, mid-back, so that's the rhomboidus. The rectus abdominis is depicted from the anterior view. It means rectus is straight. The fascicles of this muscle run straight down the abdomen. So as you see, it's a substantial muscle there of the abdomen, the rectus abdominis. The external oblique. Oh, question? Is that what that is? Sorry about that. Say what? Of course, of course. Yeah. The obliques, they are neither perpendicular nor parallel. The fascicles of this muscle lie oblique to the body's longitudinal axis. The obliques are depicted both from the posterior and the anterior view. You see the external oblique, how it goes from anterior to posterior. Interesting, I'm a baseball fan, and when I was young, you never heard of an oblique injury, never. And I'm not sure if it's the emphasis on weight training these days, but it is relatively common for baseball players, and I haven't heard of it in terms of football, but as I say, big baseball fan, to suffer these oblique injuries. And as I say, you just never heard of that when I was a kid. And I don't know that it was just something that people played with, but they're very, very painful in terms of straining, which means tearing an oblique. But and they're not easy to heal with either. So, but you see the oblique, again, neither perpendicular nor parallel. The brachioradialis muscle has its origin in the arm at the brachium, and its insertion at the radius. So the brachioradialis there, depicted from the anterior view, is the muscle, big muscle there in the forearm. The sternocleidomastoid muscle has its origin in the sternum and the clavicle, and its insertion is in the mastoid process of the temporal bone. So in terms of that, the sternocleidomastoid, all the way to the top in terms of that big muscle that comes down the neck there and inserts all the way up to your jawbone, the mastoid and the clavicle. So the masseter muscle is involved in chewing and mastication, and it's depicted from the anterior view as well there at the jawline. And the thigh adductors, they adduct and move the thighs inward. You see them also depicted on the anterior view, and you see those things, and it would make sense that that's exactly what they would do, is move the thighs inward. So let's see how we're doing. Oh my, look at the time. All right, well, let's go just a little bit, well, we're on to page 161. I think we can do this. Well, let's do the major muscles of the head and face, and then what I'll do is check your homework next time, and again, I'll just put a folder here, and you can bring your tests up if you would, your test for Module 4. Let's turn over to page 161, the major muscles of the head and face. So in terms of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, it's found on both sides of the neck. And again, it's a prime mover of a group of muscles, including the posterior triangle, which rotate and flex the head. So in terms of those things, you see that much better depicted in terms of our last illustration. It was there, but in terms of it, you see the sternocleidomastoid right there in the first illustration. The frontalis and the occipitalis muscles are two bellies of a single muscle called the occipitofrontalis. It elevates the eyebrows and wrinkles the forehead. All right, so you see that depicted there as well, and they've combined the two muscles to show you the occipital frontalis. And notice the positioning of those, and the one muscle is all the way posterior to your head. The orbicularis oculi it circles the orbit, and it's used to close the eye, as in winking. So you're using your orbicularis there. The orbicularis orsis muscle surrounds the lips, and it uses to purse them. And I believe that's the kissing, in terms of pursing. So the buccinator is the cheek muscle, and it makes rapid changes in the volume of the oral cavity. So if you're going to spit water on your brother or your sister, you're going to use the buccinator. It's depicted there as well in the top drawing. The zygomatus major elevates and draws the corner of the mouth laterally. You see it depicted as well. And the zygomatus minor elevates the upper lip. Both zygomatus muscles, zygomaticus, are used for smiling. So that's how you smile. And then the plasma muscle pulls the corners of the mouth down into a frown. It also wrinkles the skin of the neck. So that's another good reason why you don't want to frown, as it wrinkles you up as well. Mastication is the process, of course, of chewing. The temporalis muscle, that is depicted there to the left on the bottom, and it's to the right too on the top. But the temporalis elevates the mandible and retracts the mandible. It pulls the jaw inward. I'm sure all of you have felt pain when that thing, spasms. You felt pain right here if you're chewing something, perhaps, or drinking. The masseter muscle elevates the mandible. It protracts the mandible. In other words, pushes the lower jaw forward to give you a projecting jaw. You see that again depicted as well, the masseter. It's on the top one, drawing. The lateral pterygoid muscle depresses or lowers the mandible, and that is depicted there on the bottom right. And finally, the medial pterygoid elevates the mandible along with the masseter and temporalis to close the mouth so you can grind your food. So we will stop there. We went through a lot of stuff, a lot of muscles. Only one way to get this stuff, guys. Only one way. It's just to keep going over it and over it and over it. Questions or comments about any of that stuff? I'm not surprised.